Well, kindergartners through fifth graders, you're welcome to go to your classes. And for the rest of us, you can turn to Psalm 55. Psalm 55. Well, back in April of this year, Ruthie shared exciting news that she was pregnant with our first baby. We were pumped on multiple fronts. We really wanted to have kids, and we were told that it might have been a bit hard to conceive. And so throughout the pregnancy, Ruthie would track how the baby was progressing from just the size of a poppy seed to a blueberry, and then to a raspberry. And then at 20 weeks, we found out that we were going to have a baby boy. Around the 23-week mark, Ruthie began noticing that she didn't quite feel the little guy like usual. And so one night, I remember her asking me, hey, Josh, maybe you could say something to kind of get him going a little bit, see if he recognizes you. And so the pressure was kind of on. What would I say to my firstborn son for maybe one of the first times? It had to be something profound and significant, maybe something spiritual, something very, very deep. And so I thought for a bit, and I said, Luke, I am your father. The light moment of fun was darkened a few days later. Ruthie's motherly instincts led to a precautionary trip to the doctor's office where no heartbeat could be found for our little boy. And then a trip to the ultrasound room revealed a motionless little guy. And 2 days later, on September 15th, our firstborn son, Owen Zephaniah, was delivered in this world stillborn. We have been traveling a road of grief ever since then. Who knew you could love someone so much that you've never even met before? But it's not just us that face grief. We all face it, don't we? Grief comes in various shapes and sizes. Many are caring for aging parents. Parents who were once strong and full of life are now in decline. Others have lost spouses that have been by your side for decades and decades and now no longer here. Some have been diagnosed with cancer or some other condition that's flipped life and its plans upside down. Others have seen their bodies deteriorate in ways that will never come back again. Many of us have faced the grief of being wronged by a family member or a close friend. This relational conflict can spread across the spectrum of severity, but regardless of it, most of us have experienced that hurt and that pain. For some of us, it comes in the form of being discriminated for the color of our skin or from some limitation that we may have or some disability. Grief is everywhere. I remember someone saying that if you're in real community, you're always rejoicing and you're always grieving because you or someone else you know is rejoicing and because you or someone else you know is grieving. Sometimes grief is public. People all around us see it. There's opportunities and challenges that come with that. But then other times, grief is private. There are things like the grief of infertility or loneliness that come to mind. Dreams and hopes that you kind of have in your heart, in your mind that no one else knows about. And in some ways, maybe some of those dreams will never be fulfilled on this side of eternity. There's no use ranking grief. Grief is always real for the person that's experiencing it and the people around. It doesn't lessen it or make it easier just to know there's someone else going through something harder. It's real and it's unique to us. So what do we do with all this grief? How do we respond to it? Today we're going to look at a passage that might help us. In fact, it blows me away that God, in his very own word, spends so much time talking about grief. When we look at the book of Psalms, we notice that almost half of them are about lamenting and grief. Laments are songs that express people's hurt and sorrow. Lament is really the language of suffering for those who follow God. Most of these lament psalms vaguely touch on what the writer is struggling with. They may allude, like our psalm today, to a particular hurt of betrayal from a close friend. But some of the beauty of these lament psalms is that they aren't overly particular, which allows us, regardless of our situation of grief, to follow the pattern and example of lament. So today we'll see principles, whether the particular situation that causes grief in your own life is similar or quite different. And here is what the Psalm 55, is really trying to say. God can handle your grief. God can handle your grief. He can take what you're going through. As we read, you'll notice how the psalm isn't perfectly linear. It doesn't clearly move from one thing on to the next. Instead, it almost jumps around all over the place. It can feel disjointed and chaotic. But isn't that how grief is? It's not really clean and organized. Instead, it comes and it goes. Sometimes we feel it really, really strongly, and other times it's not so strong. We're not always logical in our grief. And so today, as I read, listen to the writer speak in the midst of his grief. Psalm 55. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Attend to me and answer me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan because of the noise of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they drop trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. And I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Yes, I would wander far away. I would lodge in the wilderness. I would hurry to find a shelter from the raging wind and tempest. Destroy, O Lord, divide their tongues, for I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around on its walls, and iniquity and trouble are within it. Ruin is in its midst. Oppression and fraud do not depart from its marketplace. For it is not an enemy who taunts me. Then I could bear it. It is not an adversary who deals insolently with me. Then I could hide from him. But it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. We used to take sweet counsel together within God's house. Within God's house we walked in the throng. Let death steal over them. Let them go down to Sheol alive. For evil is in their dwelling place and in their heart. But I call to God, and the Lord will save me. Evening and morning and at noon I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. He redeems my soul in safety from the battle that I wage. For many are arrayed against me. God will give ear and humble them, he who is enthroned from of old, because they do not change and do not fear God. My companion stretched out his hand against his friends. He violated his covenant. His speech was smooth as butter, yet war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. But you, O God, will cast them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and treachery shall not live out half their days. But I will trust in you. You can hear the pain in the writer's voice as he pens this lament. He believes that God can handle his grief. Roughly, we see the writer make 3 statements as he grieves. He's in the darkness, but he starts by saying, "Listen, God. Listen, God." The psalm opens, the first couple verses, verses 1 through 8, with this plea for God to listen. Look at the first few verses. You just see it right at the beginning. Give ear, O God. Attend to me. Answer me. Over and over, the writer wants God to listen to him. He pleads. He's desperate. The writer shares that he wants God, like in verse 3, to listen to the trouble that's out there all around him. I am restless in my complaint and I moan. And now verse 3, because of the noise of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they drop trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. There's trouble all around him. He's got people not looking out for his best interest. Later on in the psalm, we find out in verses 12 through 15, and then again in verses 20 and 21, who these enemies are. It's not some foreign nation. In verse 13 we see, but it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. This was one of the writer's good friends that's causing him all this grief. In verse 20, we see that they violated the covenant that they had. And in verse 21, they used their words to cause deep harm. The grief the writer was feeling was caused by people right around him. He feels betrayed and broken by their words. The old childhood saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, doesn't actually ring true in life. If you've lived long enough, you know the last part of verse 21, how sharp words can feel like daggers that run deep into our souls. But he doesn't just want God to listen to the trouble that he's having out around him. He wants God to hear about the anguish deep in his soul. It's almost like you can tangibly feel the pain the writer's going through. Look at verse 4. This is what he says. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. The writer is torn up inside. It's not just the enemy out there. There's a struggle and pain deep inside. The grief is almost too much to bear. Whatever the betrayal was, it is messing him up. Maybe it's causing him to believe lies about himself. Maybe he's tempted to spin into a spiral of self-condemnation. Maybe it's leading him down to a path of depression. Grief hits to the core of who we are. We see in verses 6 through 8, the writer wishes he was like a bird who could just get away and escape it all. He would just be able to fly away to this safe and happy place. But he and we all know you can't just escape grief. It doesn't just go away. It's something we carry around in our hearts for a long time, maybe for our entire lives. Earlier in the Bible, we hear a story of a man named Job who faced a deep and painful grief of his own. He lost all of his children in one day due to a powerful storm. He lost his business and his livelihood because of surrounding enemies that came in and took it. And then, if all that wasn't enough, he was covered literally from the top of his head to his toes with a disease. When Job's friends found out about it, they rushed to his side, and when they saw him from afar, they didn't even recognize him. He was so different. And for 7 days, these friends sat with Job. They wept and they wailed. They didn't even say anything to him. They were just with him. I wish the story of Job's friends ended there. Honestly, they weren't the best of friends after that, accusing Job of things. But we can learn from those first 7 days. When grieving, people have a deep desire to be met. No fixing needed, just empathy, a listening ear. The writer, in his grief, wants God to listen. He's demanding it. He wants God to empathize with him, to feel what he's feeling, to walk in his shoes. We can feel the same way in our grief, can't we? We just want someone with us. We don't need a lot of advice. We just want someone to feel what we're feeling. We want someone to hear about what's going on, yes, around us, but then we want someone to dive into our hearts. We want them to know and hear our pain, the sadness, the grief, the anger, to hear us through and through. There's been an outpouring of love and support since Owen has died. Consistently, one of the best gifts that we've received from people has been their tears. Why? Because those tears with the conversation are a way of expressing a deep understanding of our souls and a concern for it. And so the first handful of verses basically say, listen, God. But then the writer goes on to say, act, God. Act, God. That's what we see in verses 9 through 15. He wants God to desperately not just listen, but now emphatically act. He wants God to address his enemies. He wants things to be fixed. Verses 9 through 11 capture how messed up the situation is. See, at that time, the city was supposed to be the safe place. You have walls around you to protect you from your enemies. But what we find out in verses 9 through 11 is that, my goodness, the enemy's not out there. The enemy's in here. They're all over the place. And now the writer, he doesn't want to stay in the city. He wants to go away. In verse 7, we see him wanting to be like a bird, getting away from the city and to the wilderness, which was at that time one of the most unhelpful, unsafe places in the land. The writer calls on God to punish his enemies, his friends that closely betrayed him. He wants justice to be done. Even Jesus himself, when he was suffering and in grief, wanted God to act on his behalf. The night before he was betrayed, the night before he was about to be abandoned by his friends, about to be wrongly accused, humiliated, and ultimately killed, he steals away and he gets to a garden by himself and he gets a chance to pray to his heavenly Father. His soul is full of trouble and sorrow. He knows what's about to come for him the next day, and he prays and he asks God to take it away from him. He wants God to act. Now, God does act, but he doesn't take it away. But we see even Jesus in his grief longing for God to do something. With our grief, we also want the same thing. Of course, having a listening ear is a helpful balm in sorrow. But we also want action. We can look at deplorable grief in the world like sex trafficking, terrorism, genocide, and a whole host of other tragedies, and long for justice to be done. We see Christians in Egypt being kidnapped by ISIL and being beheaded, and instantly our hearts cry out for retribution. We want God to swoop down and make it right again. We may have experienced tragedy and just wish we could just go back in time and reverse it. Maybe God would have it for some of this justice to happen on this side of eternity. But what about the situations where there's no going back? What about it when a loved one dies suddenly? What about it when there's a lost job? It's just not coming back. What happens when you're abandoned in marriage? Many things will never be made right again here on this earth. So what now? We've pleaded with God to listen. We've demanded him to act. Well, the writer goes on to say in the last third of this psalm, trust God. He tells himself and he tells us, trust God. In verses 1 through 8, we see the writer saying, listen, God. And then he goes on in verse 9 through 15 and says, act, God. And now here in verses 16 through 23, he tells himself and he speaks to us, trust God. Trust God to listen in our grief. Trust God to listen in our grief. Remember the writer plead in verses 1 through 8, listen, God. Well, this is what we hear in the last part of verse 17. Evening and morning and at noon I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. God hears the psalmist, and he hears you. God will walk with you. He's one who is acquainted with grief. He knows what you're going through, and he hears you. He hears every single word. Just over the next psalm, in Psalm 56, in verse 8, this is what we read. You, God, have kept count of my tossings. This is beautiful. You've put my tears in your bottle, and are they not in your book? God knows every single one of your tears. He's captured every single one of them. He's recorded them. He knows you still wake up sometimes every day wondering if things will ever get back to normal. We can trust God with our grief, even grief from a long time ago. You know, the grief from 10 years ago that everyone has forgotten? Not God. He remembers that grief. He knows your frame. He sees you and he's with you. We can trust God in our grief today. We can trust him in our grief tomorrow, and we can trust him in our grief until the very end. Since Owen has died, we have met countless people who have gone through various types of grief in the past. People who had stillborn births, who have had miscarriages, who have lost their spouse tragically, or who have had a spouse abandon them. Almost without fail, as people share, you can see tears well up in their eyes, and for some of them it comes fast and easy. The crazy part is that in many of these situations, the grief is from 4 years ago, from 18 years ago, in some cases 60 years ago. Your grief may be the same. Life has moved on. Society has moved on, and yet you feel the pain of loss so close, right there. God knows you. God knows your frame. He sees your grief and has abundant love and compassion for you. We truly trust God to listen in our grief. And we trust God to act because of our grief. Trust God to act because of our grief. The writer is confident that God will act on his behalf. He's left it all up to him. Notice how the writer doesn't take things in his own hands. Instead, he hands it right over to God. Let's look at some of these verses in 16 to 23. In verse 16, but I call to God. In verse 17, I utter my complaint and moan. And then in verse 22, cast your burden on the Lord. But in those same verses, this is what the psalmist is expecting God to do on his behalf. In verse 16, you see, the Lord will save me. Verse 17, and he hears my voice. Verse 18, he redeems my soul in safety. Verse 19, God will give ear and humble his enemies. Verse 22, cast your burden on the Lord, and what? And he will sustain you. Verse 22, he will never permit the righteous to be moved. And then in verse 23, God will cast his enemy down. Do you hear all the things that the writer is trusting God to do in the midst of his grief? Let these be a comfort to you in your grief. God hears you. He knows your heart. He understands what you're going through. And he dives to the depths of your soul. But he's not just a good listener. He will act for you. He will humble your enemy and ensure that you are sustained. As verse 22 said, he will never permit the righteous to be moved. Do you feel like you're on shaky ground? Do you feel weak and maybe torn apart by grief inside? God will sustain you. He will keep you going. He will hold you up. See, the writer is modeling for us what he tells us. He tells us, cast your burden on the Lord, and he's shown us what it looks like in the first half of this psalm. The writer pleads to be heard at the beginning, and we see that God has heard him in verse 17. He pleads for God to deal with the enemy out there, and we see God bringing justice in verse 19 and 23. He asks God to hear the torment in his soul, and we see God fulfilling that by saving, redeeming, and keeping him. The writer trusts God by telling him what he needs and believing that God's going to come through. That's what we're to do in our grief. Give it to God. Cast your burden on the Lord. Really, name the things that are burdening your soul. Let God know. Wail and moan and let your entire being come unraveled before God. And then trust that he's going to come through. He'll take care of the things that are wrong out there. Trust him in relational conflict. Don't take it on yourself to bring justice. That's God's responsibility. You ask for what you need, and then God will do the rest. Believe that he'll meet you in your brokenness and your grief. He understands the torment of your experience. You see your body changing. It's on a decline, and you don't see it coming back. Trust God in it. He will meet you, and he will fulfill your deepest longings. He will mend your heart. And we trust even when things are not okay. We don't know how the story ends for the writer here. The psalm doesn't end with some nice bow tie Disney ending where the emotion kicks in and the music kind of cues in and everyone hugs it out. To the best of our knowledge, a sting of betrayal, it's still there. And yet the writer, this is how he ends in verse 23. But I will trust in you. But I will trust in you. The writer is saying that even though everything isn't wrapped up, even though everything isn't fixed, I will trust you right here, right now. I'm not going to wait till everything gets better. Right here in the grief, I will trust you. Aren't our lives so similar? Everything doesn't end peacefully and beautifully. Everything isn't a storybook ending. Instead, real life has real pain and grief that continues through the years. Some things will never be made right on this side of eternity. We can't bring people back from the dead. Some relationships will be broken for the rest of our lives. Some pain or disease will never be healed. But it's right here, even as grief continues, that we place our trust in God again. How do we know that God's going to come through? We see it so clearly in him sending his only Son. God willingly planned to allow his only Son to leave perfect relationship and fellowship with him for what? To suffer. Jesus suffered. He's the one that walked in our grief. The scriptures say that he was one that was acquainted with grief. He's not foreign to it. He endured it and experienced it. God the Father saw his own Son suffer and be separated from him. Jesus has walked and can walk in our grief. He understands. He cares. He's been there. But Jesus isn't just some weakling God that endures grief. Jesus is sovereign. He will fix our grief. He didn't just experience our problems. He came to fix them. He came to redeem it and provide hope to the sufferer. He took the full weight of grief on himself. He took it all the injustice, all the pain, all the betrayal, all the hardship on himself. He took the full swing of sin's penalty and he died. But he rose again. He overcame it all. He took all grief, and you know what? Grief lost. He took on pain and he came out on the other side whole. He died in tragedy, but he rose in victory. He went through the ultimate nightmare so we could have everlasting dreams. We can trust our grief with our suffering and sovereign Savior. He will listen, and he has acted so we can endure, trust, and hope eternal. He's done the work so that we can get through the hard times. He's accomplished it all on the cross. So we can daily pick up our cross and follow him. His finished work in history allows us to live in the present and hope for the future. Jesus is our perfect God who meets us in our grief and helps us with our grief. He will listen and heal. He will act and fix. So through eyes filled with tears and bodies that ache and hearts that are in anguish, trust in him. God can handle your grief today, and we trust that one day he will make all things new again. Would you pray with me? God, it's hard for us in our brokenness to say that we'll trust you, but today we come and we just say with our words, we trust you. Our hearts hurt, many of them troubled with great brokenness, with pain that's new, with pain that's been around for years and years. And we give it to you, and we ask you, God, to sustain us. Would you hold on to us? would you allow us the strength to say we trust you? We ask you for this mercy. In Christ's name, amen.